I had an affair with Jean Clark, and at that point John Phillips had reached his limit. He was no longer willing to tolerate the situation, especially not from someone he felt was causing embarrassment to the group. He confronted Denny Doherty and Cass Elliot and gave them a clear ultimatum. Either she would leave, or he would. Under those conditions, there was never any real doubt about who would stay. For a while, people later claimed that the fallout lasted nearly a year, but that was not true. The reality was that the separation lasted closer to 2.5 months. Still, those few months were enough to reveal how fragile everything behind the scenes really was. In 1966, four voices came together to define the sound of an entire generation. Their music felt effortless, joyful, and perfectly balanced, like sunshine captured in harmony. But behind that polished sound was a deeply complicated reality. Love triangles, jealousy, secrets, and power struggles slowly pulled the group apart from the inside. One member was fired temporarily and replaced by someone connected personally to the producers. Another carried a quiet crush that never turned into anything but heartbreak. And while the affair caused shock, it was far from the darkest thing that would later emerge. By 2025, only one member of the group remained alive to speak openly about what really happened. What began as one of America's most beloved bands slowly transformed into one of the most tragic stories in music history. At the center of it all stood John Phillips. John Phillips is often remembered in simple terms. He is introduced as the creative force behind the Mamas and the Papas, the songwriter who gave the world California Dreamin and Monday, and the man whose voice seemed to capture the feeling of the 1960s. But when you look more closely, his life feels like two separate stories happening at the same time. One story is bright, structured, and successful. The other is restless, chaotic, and destructive. He was born on August 30th, 1935, in Parris Island, South Carolina. From an early age, he searched for order and purpose, only to pull away from it just as quickly. He went to military school, made ambitious plans, and then abruptly changed direction. By the early 1960s, John was chasing music in New York City. That pursuit eventually led him to form a group called the Journeymen with Scott McKenzie and Dick Weissman. The group gave him experience and confidence, and soon the momentum began to build. California called to him, both creatively and personally. It was there that he met Michelle Gilliam, who became his wife and later one of the most recognizable faces of the Mamas and the Papas. From the outside, their story looked like harmony and happiness. Four voices blending perfectly, radiating warmth and optimism. But inside the group, tension was always present. John was not just singing. He was controlling the direction of the sound, shaping arrangements, leading studio sessions, and constantly writing. That level of control brought success, but it also brought resentment and strain. In 1966, everything exploded into fame. Their debut album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, was released on February 28 and went on to become their only album to reach #1 on the Billboard 200. The songs sounded natural and easy, as if they had come together without effort. But the truth was very different. The work behind the scenes was intense, stressful, and often painful. While the music smiled, their personal lives began to crack. John later spoke openly about his heavy drug use, and those around him watched as it affected every part of his life. It was no longer limited to late nights. It spilled into the days, the rehearsals, and the relationships. By 1980, his struggles were impossible to ignore. He was arrested on drug charges, and later reflections on that time described it as a clear breaking point. Years of substance abuse took a serious toll on his body. In 1992, John underwent a liver transplant, a direct result of long-term addiction. Even after surviving something so serious, he still seemed unable to escape the same destructive patterns. But the most disturbing chapter of his story came years after his death. In 2009, after John Phillips had passed away, his daughter Mackenzie Phillips made shocking allegations. She claimed that her father had an abusive and incestuous relationship with her that began in 1979, when she was 19 years old, and lasted for about a decade. She also said the relationship ended after she became pregnant and had an abortion that he paid for. These claims split the family publicly. Some relatives, including his wife at the time and Michelle Phillips, rejected her account. Others said they believed her. From that point on, it became impossible to separate the music from the darkness surrounding his name. John Phillips died on March 18, 2001, in Los Angeles at the age of 65. Reports at the time pointed to heart failure as the cause. His legacy remains deeply conflicted. On one side, he helped define the sound of an era and wrote songs that people still sing without thinking. On the other, his life was marked by addiction, chaos, and allegations that cast a long shadow. The same hands that created beautiful harmonies also carried damage that could never fully be hidden. Cass Elliot, known to the world as Mama Cass, was the emotional heart of the Mamas and the Papas. Her voice felt warm, powerful, and comforting all at once. Before fame, she was Ellen Naomi Cohen, born on September 19, 1941, in Baltimore, Maryland. She grew up near Washington, D.C., and even as a teenager, she was desperate to be heard. Musical theater was her first love, but her dreams quickly grew bigger. She left high school to pursue acting and singing in New York City, a decision that brought struggle instead of stability. Life became louder, faster, and uncertain, but it also placed her in spaces where talent mattered more than background. By 1963, Cass was part of a progressive folk trio called the Big Three. As the years passed, the group evolved into the Mugwumps, and then in 1965, everything aligned when she joined John Phillips, Michelle Phillips, and Denny Doherty to form the Mamas and the Papas. Their timing was perfect, and their sound was unforgettable. The group sold nearly 40 million records and earned 6 top 10 hits on the Billboard charts. To the public, their lives looked glamorous. In reality, they were often harsh and exhausting. Cass faced constant criticism for her appearance. The industry judged her body before acknowledging her talent. She was repeatedly told she was too fat to sing, as if her voice needed approval to exist. But the truth was undeniable. Her voice became the soul of their music. When people thought of California Dreaming or Monday, it was her sound they remembered. Even when she was overlooked or dismissed, she remained at the center of the music itself. When the group broke up in 1968, Cass faced new pressure. Now it was her name, her career, and her future on the line. She did not fade away. Instead, she built a successful solo career with songs like Dream a Little Dream of Me, It's Getting Better, and Make Your Own Kind of Music. Her voice carried comfort and strength, like reassurance and rebellion wrapped together. In 1998, she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as part of the Mamas and the Papas, a recognition that confirmed what fans had always known. Her life, however, ended far too soon. On July 29, 1974, Cass Elliot died in London at just 32 years old. She was found in her apartment in Mayfair, and the official cause was a heart attack. Almost immediately, a cruel rumor spread that she had choked on a ham sandwich. That story followed her for decades, reducing her life to a joke. The autopsy told a different truth. She died of heart failure. No drugs were found in her system, and no food was found in her throat. The rumor was later revealed to have been started by her manager, who wanted to avoid drug-related speculation. Cass's daughter later spoke out and called the story what it was, a myth. Even in death, Cass was judged unfairly. But her music never allowed the lie to define her. Her voice remained stronger than the noise. Denny Doherty possessed a voice that stopped people in their tracks. Long before fame, he was simply a young man from Halifax, Nova Scotia, born on November 29, 1940. Far from the spotlight, he learned harmony, discipline, and the emotional cost of performing. In the early 1960s, he sang with groups like the Halifax Three, gaining experience and resilience. Those years prepared him for the whirlwind that followed. By 1965, he arrived in Los Angeles, where he met John Phillips, Michelle Phillips, and Cass Elliot. Together, they created something unforgettable, even as personal struggles quietly threatened to tear it apart. Together, they formed the Mamas and the Papas, and very quickly the group became bigger than any one of them. Their sound felt fresh and powerful, and people responded almost instantly. When their debut album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, was released in February 1966, it climbed straight to #1 on the Billboard charts. Songs like California Dreaming and Monday did more than succeed commercially. They became emotional markers of an era, songs people tied to memories, feelings, and a sense of freedom. At the heart of those smooth harmonies was Denny Doherty's clear and soaring tenor. It was the voice critics called angelic and listeners remembered most. On the radio, his singing sounded effortless, almost floating above the music. Behind the scenes, however, life inside the group was anything but calm. The success could not hide the emotional mess growing between them. Love, jealousy, and unspoken pain were always present, quietly shaping their interactions. In late 1965, Denny began an affair with Michelle Phillips, who at the time was married to John Phillips. At first, the relationship stayed hidden. It was whispered about but never openly addressed. The secret followed them into rehearsals, studio sessions, and performances, creating tension that never fully went away. When the truth finally came out, the damage was immediate and intense. John was furious and deeply hurt, feeling betrayed both personally and professionally. In June 1966, after discussions with the record label and an attempt to protect the future of the band as he saw it, John made a harsh decision. He fired Michelle from the group. For a brief period, Jill Gibson stepped in to replace her and help keep the band moving forward. But the chemistry that had made the group special was fragile and difficult to recreate. Without Michelle, something felt missing. After about 2.5 months, she was brought back, and the original lineup was restored. Even so, the innocence and trust that once existed were gone. The group continued, but nothing felt quite the same again. In the middle of that emotional chaos, John and Denny co-wrote the song I Saw Her Again, which was directly inspired by the affair itself. Turning such personal pain into music did not heal the wounds. Instead, it created new ones. Later, they argued over who had contributed more to the song, turning art into yet another source of conflict. The line between personal life and professional work blurred completely, and the pressure never eased. Away from the spotlight, Denny's personal life was full of struggle. He married twice and became the father of 2 children, but stability remained difficult. He battled alcoholism for much of his adult life, and fame did nothing to protect him from his own habits and fears. Success brought money and recognition, but it did not bring peace. Still, Denny kept trying to fix himself. In the early 1980s, he finally became sober, and this time, he managed to stay that way for the rest of his life. Sobriety gave him clarity and allowed him to keep working, even as the spotlight faded. Many people remembered him only as the voice from the golden years of the Mamas and the Papas, but Denny never stopped performing. He continued to sing and act, finding new ways to connect with audiences. He appeared in films such as Girl, Interrupted, and became a familiar and comforting presence on television, especially for children, through shows like Theodore Tugboat. Recognition came later, almost like a quiet apology from history. In 1998, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Mamas and the Papas. Then in 2024, he was honored again when he was inducted into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame, permanently linking his name to the musical history of his home country. Denny's final years were calm but marked by health problems. On January 19, 2007, in Mississauga, Ontario, he died at the age of 66. The cause was kidney failure following surgery for an abdominal aortic aneurysm. When his funeral was held in his hometown of Halifax, it felt like a full circle moment. The place where his journey began became the place where it quietly ended. Michelle Phillips stood and delivered the eulogy. She described him as one of the greatest tenors in rock and roll and spoke of him as one of the kindest, dearest, and most beloved people she had ever known. Her words carried the weight of shared history, pain, forgiveness, and affection that never fully disappeared. Today, Denny Doherty's legacy lives on in many forms. It exists in old records, in Hall of Fame plaques, and in the stories that still surround his name. Stories of a voice that could lift a room, of love that became complicated, of betrayal and regret, of addiction and recovery, and of a man who kept showing up to sing even when life pulled him in every direction. All of it lives inside the music. Each time those songs are played, a piece of Denny's fragile, complicated, and resilient life comes alive again. Michelle Phillips grew up with music already waiting somewhere in her future, but her life began with deep loss. She was born on June 4, 1944, in Long Beach, California. When she was only 5 years old, her mother died suddenly from a brain aneurysm. That early tragedy shaped her childhood and left an emotional gap that never fully healed. She was raised by her father, a man whose frequent affairs disrupted any sense of stability at home. Watching his relationships fall apart influenced how Michelle later understood love, trust, and commitment. As she grew older, grief and confusion became part of her emotional foundation, slowly blending into the choices she made and the songs she would one day help bring to life. In the middle of the 1960s, Michelle Phillips' life suddenly grew far beyond the small personal struggles she had known before. In 1965, she married John Phillips, and together they helped form what would soon become one of the most famous music groups of the decade, the Mamas and the Papas. Everything moved incredibly fast. By 1966, their debut album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, was released, with California Dreamin at its center. Michelle had co-written that song, and almost overnight, the group's harmonies turned them into the voices of an entire generation. On stage, they appeared united and flawless, as if nothing could break their connection. But away from the spotlight, their lives were full of emotions that refused to stay simple or controlled. Michelle began an affair with fellow band member Denny Doherty while she was still married to John. That decision created a deep wound inside the group. Cass Elliot, who had long held quiet feelings for Denny, was hurt and pushed emotionally to the side. Jealousy, heartbreak, and pride all mixed together and followed them from city to city as they toured. At the same time, drugs were becoming a growing presence. John's increasing substance abuse fed paranoia and controlling behavior, turning rehearsals into tense spaces where unspoken arguments seemed to hang in the air. Eventually, the pressure became too much. When the affair could no longer be ignored, Michelle was pushed out of the band. She was temporarily replaced by Jill Gibson. On paper, it looked like a simple replacement, but audiences could immediately feel that something was missing. Fans noticed the difference, and after a few months, Michelle was brought back. Even so, the trust that once held the group together was gone for good. By 1968, the band fell apart, and by 1970, Michelle's marriage to John ended as well. Despite everything, Michelle did not fade away. She shifted her focus toward acting and slowly built a second career in television and film. People who had grown up listening to her voice on California Dreamin now watched her on screen. One of her most notable roles came in Knots Landing, where she played a glamorous but troubled character, proving she could carry emotional weight without music. While her place in music history remained secure, another woman with the same name stepped into a completely different spotlight years later. In the 2020s, a civil rights leader named Michelle Phillips served as Minneapolis Civil Rights Director, working on police conduct review cases before leaving in June 2025 to take a new leadership role as Assistant City Administrator in Oakland, California. Though unrelated to the singer, her story shows how the same name can travel through very different worlds, one under stage lights and one inside government offices. Today, the Michelle Phillips who sang with the Mamas and the Papas is the last surviving member of the group. Her life stretches from early childhood loss through massive 1960s fame and into years of acting and reinvention. It is a journey shaped by beautiful harmonies, painful betrayals, exhausting tours, and quiet personal rebuilding, and it still echoes each time new listeners discover those old records and feel something real in her voice. Jill Gibson's brief time with the Mamas and the Papas began like a dream and quickly turned into one of the most shocking stories of 1960s rock music. In June 1966, Michelle Phillips was suddenly removed from the band after news spread about her affair. The group's producer, Lou Adler, acted quickly and made a surprising decision. Instead of holding auditions, he chose his own girlfriend, Jill Gibson, to replace Michelle. Jill was not an inexperienced outsider. She was already a singer and songwriter, had worked with John and Dean, and was also a serious visual artist. By June 28, 1966, Michelle was officially fired, and Jill was already in the studio rehearsing with the band just days before they flew to England. During that trip, Jill was treated as a full member of the group. She attended business meetings, performed with them, and spent nights in London's private rock clubs alongside members of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. For a moment, it felt as if she truly belonged to that world. Her time with the band lasted only about 2 months, but those weeks were filled with pressure and intensity. She had just 3 weeks to learn Michelle's harmonies and stage parts before being thrown into major performances. She sang live with the band at Forest Hills in New York in front of huge crowds and appeared with them on national television on ABC's Hollywood Palace. In the studio, Jill worked on songs for the group's second album, which was planned for release in September 1966. She later claimed she sang on 10 tracks, while Lou Adler insisted she appeared on only 6, including a song called Trip, Stumble, and Fall. While arguments continued over credits and contributions, time ran out. On August 23, 1966, Michelle was brought back into the band, and Jill was told her role was finished. She was paid a lump sum and quietly removed. When fans later read the album credits, it appeared as if Michelle had never left at all. Most of the album was re-recorded with Michelle's voice, and the final cover featured her image, not Jill's. That choice created a mystery that still has not fully been resolved. Even today, people debate which songs contain Jill's vocals and which belong to Michelle. Only the producer and engineer knew the full truth, and they never clearly explained it. Jill later said she felt deeply betrayed. She believed she had been promised a permanent place in the band, so the sudden change felt personal as well as professional. After that experience, she stepped away from the spotlight and returned to her art and photography, where she had always felt grounded. In 1967, she became an official photographer for the Monterey Pop Festival and built a successful career on her own terms, far from band politics and fame-driven chaos. Now in her 80s, she lives a quiet life and remains one of the last living connections to the original era of the Mamas and the Papas, carrying memories that album covers and history books never fully revealed.